Okay, so for the past week, I've been watching like random plush collection videos just for the heck of it, and it made me think, what would be like the definitive Willy Wonka merchandise collection? I want a merch collection that is able to represent every single major version of Willy Wonka that has ever been released. This can range from plushes to costumes to other forms of merchandise. And to those who aren't acquainted with the Willy Wonka franchise, buckle up because we have a lot to cover. I'm going to cover each version of Wonka introduced in chronological order, trying to find even the smallest piece of merchandise to their name, and deducing which ones would be best for a collection. There are certain versions of Wonka who don't count, like those who have literally zero qualifiable merchandise due to how obscure or niche they are, and coloring book Wonka since he technically counts as merchandise. Without further ado, let's get started. There is a surprising amount of merchandise for the original book version of Wonka. First and foremost, plushies. There are quite a few plushies of book Wonka, based off of the Quentin Blake illustrations. My personal two favorites are this plush hand puppet hybrid made by Fiesta Crafts, and a plush made by Rainbow Designs. I like the more equally spaced proportions of the hand puppet as well as the fact that it's a hand puppet. And I like the Rainbow Designs plush because it matches more in line with Book Wonka's actual build, and it has the decency to actually feature Wonka's goatee. There is also a Book Wonka teddy bear made by the Stife Bear Company, but it's rather uncommon. And of course there are copies of the original book, but there are so many additions to them to the point where it's one giant rabbit hole. That would take way too much to cover here, so search online and find whatever version you like. In terms of other forms of Book Wonka merchandise, there's actually a pretty diverse cast of things you can own. Book Wonka is one of the Robert Harrop lines of Roald Dahl figurines. A really chaotic version of him is present in a few pages of this Roald Dahl coloring book released in 2016, which is where Coloring Book Wonka comes from. They also had these cool posters, including a Truffle Shuffle art print featuring Quentin Blake artwork, and two Spineless Classics posters, though I like this version more with Charlie and Wonka, since Wonka isn't nondescript and again features a goatee. There are even Book Wonka costumes, of varying quality. They also released a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory video game for the ZX Spectrum, but physical copies are rather uncommon. In terms of plushies, if you want a more accurate depiction of Book Wonka, then the Rainbow Designs plush is your best bet. If you want other forms of merch, I would get the Robert Harrop figurine and maybe the aforementioned Spineless Classics poster if you're feeling generous. Considering the 1971 film's notoriety, there is a lot of merch for 1971 Wonka. First off, plushies. There is a short line of 1971 film plushies made by Toy Factory LLC, one of them being 1971 Wonka. There is also a 1971 Wonka squeaky toy made by Fetch for Pets. There is a Mego action figure for 1971 Wonka, as well as a bobblehead made by NECA. There is also a line of Nestle dolls made by PPW Toys, with the largest doll being a portrayal of Mr. Wonka himself. There is also a crap ton of posters for the 1971 film. My personal favorite is this vintage-style one. To promote the film's initial release, they held this promotion thing with Quaker Oats where if you donated box tops, you could get this chocolate mold making toy, but these are very rare and usually very expensive when they do show up. They also make 1971 Wonka costumes, and there are a lot. There are, of course, physical copies of the 1971 film, which come in multiple DVD variations, and VHS releases, and even releases on Laserdisc. There are also online shopping collections like the Zazzle merch store, though they largely feature pre-made graphics printed onto whatever objects. If you want plushies, I would go for the Toy Factory plush since it most resembles the character while also getting the color palette correct. That and the fact that you can find them everywhere on secondhand shopping sites. Usually for pretty good prices too. In terms of other forms of merchandise, if you want something that has like actual effort put into it, I'd buy the bobblehead, one of the posters, and the Nestor doll set if you want to add pizzazz to your collection. Now we enter the wild world of the Wonka Candy Company, starting with its very first mascot in Breaker Wonka. Breaker Wonka, despite having lived the longest out of like the 5 or 6 main mascots, doesn't have a lot of readily available merchandise that can be found online. We have a ton of image archives, but nothing that can really be bought directly unless you're really willing to dig deep on eBay. Speaking of eBay, you will occasionally see old candy boxes show up on eBay, but because of their age, expect to fork over a pretty penny. Mark Sweet is a comedian and magician who used to work for the Wonka company, playing a sort of real-life Wonka spokesperson. Turns out he actually has a bit of merchandise to his name. Once upon a time, he made this VHS that you could get in the mail where he shows off magic tricks. No physical copies have shown up for sale online, but he uploaded this VHS straight to YouTube. So if you want, you can download that and you're good to go. Bonus points if you actually know how to put it on an actual VHS. Very, very rarely print ads featuring Mark Sweet Wonka do show up for sale online, so good luck. Okay, so we've kind of hit an awkward roadblock with this one. Swedish Wonka first appeared in the first Swedish language editions of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. But what separates him from Book Wonka is the fact that he would get his own TV movie in 1983, Kalle och Chokladfabriken by Sveriges Television. What's unfortunate is that this film has largely existed within its own personal bubble, barely ever being known about by those outside of Sweden until very recently. This version features real goofy and surreal watercolor illustrations done by Bernt Arne who also did the Swedish version of Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. VHS copies of the Swedish cartoon do exist, but they are extremely rare. And most of the time, the seller doesn't even ship it outside of Europe, despite the film largely being lost media, but whatever. What doesn't help is that because of the film's length, the VHS release is split up into 2 parts. If you really do want to own Swedish Wonka in your collection, I would just recommend getting one of the first Swedish edition books on sites like Taderia, since they're much more common. If you want to be representing the cartoon specifically, I would get the first book since its illustrations were used in the cartoon, but if you want to represent Swedish Wonka as a whole, I would get the Glass Elevator book since its illustrations are in color, and the color palettes of these characters are the same ones they used in the Swedish cartoon. Neat! The next candy mascot is Sunmark Wonka, who actually has some accessible merchandise to his name. First and foremost, there are a couple of candy tins that feature him, and there is a Nerd's baseball cap that came from this era. And there are even a few t-shirts and jackets. As for having Sunmark Wonka in your collection, I'd say buy one of the candy tins. They're the most readily available online and actually feature Sunmark Wonka on them. While still rather niche, all things considered, classic Nestle Wonka actually has a surprising amount of merch to his name. The most popular example are these old candy tins, which you see pop up everywhere on secondhand shopping sites like eBay. If you want a more 3D version of him, there's this little Nerd's gumball machine toy that has a little 3D Nestle Wonka on the top. They even made little candy dispensers, which are less common but still nice little things to have. They even made Wonka baseballs and golf balls of all things. There are also t-shirts, most of which do feature vectors of the mascot. Speaking of which, some of the candies themselves even have merchandise. Obviously, there are the candy boxes, which go up for sale on eBay surprisingly often, and other forms of merchandise like t-shirts. Genuinely, the only plushes from the classic era are some Nerds plushies. I do know they made Pokemon treat keepers during this era, which were little plush Pokemon that had Wonka treats hidden inside them, but these are Pokemon plushies, so they don't count. And sadly, this means there isn't a classic Nestle Wonka plush that is known to exist. And I can honestly see why. Even though classic Nestle Wonka's design is goated, the only genuine negative I have with it is that it's rather hard to effectively translate into 3D, which conveniently leads into our next version of Wonka. If you want to represent Nestle UK's Wonka advertising in your collection, the only advice I can give you is good frickin' luck! Most of Wonka UK's advertising from back then has, unfortunately, been lost to time. And what we do have that has miraculously stood the test of time is very hard to get a hold of. Things like candy wrappers and boxes and who knows what else barely ever show up online. Sadly, there is no feasible way of getting this terrifying 3D mascot into your collection. At least not officially. If you really want Nestle UK Wonka in your collection but don't want to gamble with the incomprehensibly slim chance of some genuine Wonka UK memorabilia going up for sale online, genuinely the only advice I can give you is download 2 surviving wallpapers from wonka.co.uk and save them as your desktop wallpaper, or draw the UK mascot on a physical piece of paper, ? Either that or take this graphic of his face and transfer it to a sticker and have it shipped to your house via Sticker Mule or something. Genuinely, these are like your only chances of getting UK Wonka in your collection. Because in terms of actual legit merchandise, you might as well not even bother. But I'm sure there is at least one person asking, why is so much Wonka UK content lost? Well, it has to do with, Insert obligatory, I like and respect Johnny Depp but hate this version Wonka reference here, and we're good to go. For mostly worse, the 2005 film was advertised heavily during its heyday, which of course means lots of merchandise. As for the 2005 film itself, physical copies, there are a couple of versions of the DVD release, and they even have rare VHS releases if you're into that. While there are no official, legit 2005 Wonka plushies, there are action figures that have been made by Funrise Toys, which look surprisingly good. NECA also made a 1:6 scale figure that has sound functionality, I think, but these are pretty rare and usually pretty expensive. The closest thing they do have to a plushie is this weird plush doll thing made by Medicom, but it's really rare. They also made Beanie Babies for the 2005 Oompa Loompas. Other forms of merchandise include 2 video games. Why would you ever buy these? They also made a board game called the Fantastical Factory game and a weird Great Glass Elevator game, as well as an updated version of the chocolate mold toy from earlier. They also had a line of trading cards, and they do make 2005 Wonka costumes, but they're rather uncommon. If you don't want to spend a lot, then I'd recommend the Funrise action figure and maybe whatever other niche knickknacks you can find online. Okay, so aside from like candy boxes, which is hard to tell because they use the exact same logo, there is barely anything you can get from the Wonka Company's late 2000s modern era. They made like these weird LCD Wonkazoid game console things in 2006, but these never show up online. Your best bet is trying to find a magazine scanner from the modern era, which features this dumb downgrade of classic Nestle Wonka. They did this Willy Wonka opera back in 2010, and as far as I can tell, the only piece of merchandise to have spawned from it is its soundtrack. You can buy it from Poshmark, apparently? Yeah, I've got nothing for this one, sorry. One of the most popular Willy Wonka adaptations, there is a lot of merchandise for this musical. Obviously, there is the soundtrack release, and from what I can tell, multiple versions of the musical, including foreign versions, have released physical and digital editions of their songs. They also have other forms of merchandise. Some ones that stand out are posters and magnets. Like actual straight-up fridge magnets. Yeah, I hope you remember those exist. They also have shirts, and there's this one really cute coloring shirt where you get to draw on it with markers. Also, pins exist so you can pin them in your shirt too. Sadly, Broadway Wonka himself only barely has actual merchandise, unless you want to spend a ton of money on a signed autograph or something. Yeah, remember Tom and Jerry Wonka? He exists. And he doesn't really have any merchandise aside from physical releases of his film, which is overall meh, slightly above average at best, slightly below average at worst. It's actually kind of sad that he doesn't have any merchandise to his name, since I actually kind of like how they adapted Wonka into the Hanna-Barbera style. If you want to own him, then get the DVD. Watch it if you have about 2 hours of time to waste to turn your brain off. And that right there is my Wonka merchandise dream collection. If I had to specify each item that would be in my collection specifically, it would be the Rainbow Designs plush, Robert Harp figure, Spineless Classics poster, and a copy of the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory book for Book Wonka, the Toy Factory LLC plush, the Mego action figure, the PPW Toy Nestler doll set, and a DVD copy of the 1971 film for 1971 Wonka, print posters for both Breaker Wonka and Mark Sweet Wonka, a copy of the Kali Och Chocolate Fabrican book for Swedish Wonka, a print ad and the 2 candy containers for Sunmark Wonka, a shirt, some candy containers, and the Gumball Machine toy for classic Nestle Wonka, 2 of the surviving wallpapers and a head sticker for Nestle UK Wonka, the Funrise action figure and a DVD copy of the 2005 film for 2005 Wonka, a print ad or 2 for modern Nestle Wonka, some memorabilia and a CD copy of the musical soundtrack for Broadway Wonka, and a DVD copy of the Tom and Jerry crossover for Tom and Jerry Wonka. I know I didn't cover every piece of Wonka merchandise ever, mostly because I feel like it would take way too long for me to talk about every single piece of merchandise. But if you know any cool merch that you think should belong in the collection, let me know. I'd love to hear your additions. Peace on.